Sergeant Owen Hart was not supposed to be the last one searching. His unit had already moved on. Lieutenant Sam Greer had called the colony a total loss 40 minutes ago, marked it in the report and pulled everyone back toward the landing zone. The peacekeeping mission had a schedule. There were 3 other sites to assess before nightfall, and nobody had the time or the orders to stand in the ruins of a dead settlement and wait for something that probably was not there. Owen stayed anyway. He was not entirely sure why. Maybe it was the scanner reading that kept pulling his eye, a faint warmth buried somewhere under the eastern wall. Too small to be a functioning power cell. Too steady to be a fire ember. He had flagged it twice and both times Sam had told him it was probably residual heat from the attack and to stop wasting time. Owen looked at the reading one more time. Then he walked toward the collapsed wall alone. The Vrethkai colony had been beautiful once. He could tell even now with everything broken. The buildings had been carved from the dark stone of the moon itself, shaped in long curved forms that looked almost like sleeping creatures when seen from above. The settlement had sat in a wide valley surrounded by pale rock formations, the kind of place that probably caught extraordinary light at sunrise. There were markings on the walls that had survived the destruction, deep-etched patterns that Owen did not understand but could tell were old. The kind of old that made human history feel very short. Now it was ash and silence and the smell of something burned. Owen stepped carefully through the debris. Around him were signs of the people who had lived here, not just the large architectural bones of the settlement but the smaller things. A carved bowl tipped on its side. Something that looked like a child's toy, shaped from smooth river stone. A piece of cloth, thick and deep blue, pinned under a fallen beam. He did not look at these things for long. He reached the collapsed eastern wall and crouched down. The scanner reading was coming from below, from beneath a section of stone that had come down in one heavy slab, leaning against the wall's remains at an angle. There was a gap underneath. Small. Maybe 30 centimeters at its widest point. Owen pressed the scanner closer and waited. The reading pulsed. Slow and faint but real. He set the scanner down, took off his outer jacket and started moving stone. It was not easy work. The Vrethkai built with dense rock, the kind that did not shift without effort. Owen was not a small man but some of the pieces took everything he had, and a few of them he could only roll rather than lift. He worked steadily and without hurrying because the worst thing he could do was bring more weight down on whatever was underneath. Sweat ran down the back of his neck. His hands scraped against rough edges and he ignored it. 15 minutes in he heard something. A sound. Very soft. More like a breath than anything else. A small, shuddering exhale that came from directly below the next slab. Owen stopped moving. He went very still and listened. It came again. He worked faster after that but still carefully. He cleared 2 more pieces of wall, shifting them sideways inch by inch, and then lay flat on the ground to look into the space that opened up. The hatchling was looking back at him. Owen had read about the Vrethkai in mission briefings. He knew they were a reptilian species, large, 4-winged, ancient. The briefings had described them as proud and deeply private, rarely photographed and almost never studied up close. The images he had seen were of adults. Massive creatures with hard-scaled bodies and bioluminescent frills that ran along their necks and spines. The hatchling was nothing like those images and everything like them at once. It was tiny. Small enough that Owen could have held it in both arms without difficulty. Its scales were dark, almost black, but shot through with deep amber tones that caught even the low gray light of the ruins. Its 4 wings were folded tight against its body, thin membranes, still soft-looking, pressed flat. Its frills, which on an adult Vrethkai would have been bright and broad, were small and pale and barely glowing. Like coals that had almost gone out. Its hind legs were pinned beneath a piece of stone that had not fully collapsed. Enough space to breathe, not enough to move. Owen could see the angle wrong with them from where he lay, and he did not let his face show what that told him. The hatchling stared at him. Its eyes were gold. Not yellow, gold the way old metal is gold, deep and layered. Too serious for something so small. Too steady for something that had been trapped in the dark for however many hours. Owen held its gaze and stayed very still. "Hey," he said quietly. Not to communicate, he doubted the hatchling understood standard, but because silence felt wrong. "I've got you. Just stay still for me." The hatchling's frills flickered. Its upper lip pulled back and it made a weak sound, something between a hiss and a growl, thin and exhausted. A warning. The best one it could manage. "Fair enough," Owen said. He started clearing the last of the stone. The piece pinning its hind legs took the longest. Owen had to find the right angle. Removing it wrong would shift weight onto the hatchling rather than away from it. He worked slowly, one hand braced, the other guiding the slab in a sideways roll until it dropped clear of the gap with a heavy thud. The hatchling tried to move immediately. Its front legs scrambled and its frills flared, bright for just a second, a sudden amber flash, and then it stopped. It had tried to pull itself forward and its hind legs had not responded the way they were supposed to. It looked down at them. Then it looked back up at Owen. That look was the thing that Owen would remember later, lying awake on the ship. Not the ruins. Not the stillness of the colony or the weight of what it meant that there were no survivors. The look the hatchling gave its own hind legs, confused and then not confused. Something that settled into a quiet kind of understanding that no creature that small should have been capable of. Owen opened his medic bag without looking away from it. He had carried the same bag for 6 years. It had treated shrapnel wounds and broken bones and a dozen types of alien biology across 4 systems. He knew it the way a person knows something they have depended on long enough that it becomes part of their hands. He pulled out the sedative kit and looked at it for a moment. He had nothing calibrated for Vrethkai. He did not know their weight tolerance or their metabolic rate or what compounds were safe and which were not. He had a general-use sedative designed for a wide range of species biologies, meant for exactly these situations, and he had his own judgment. He prepared the smallest dose he could safely draw and held it out to let the hatchling see it. Not to explain, just because hiding it felt wrong. The hatchling watched him. Its frills were dim again. Its breathing was shallow and tired. Owen administered the dose carefully, along the side of its neck where the scales were thinnest. The hatchling flinched but did not snap. Within 2 minutes its eyes grew heavy. Within 4 was still. Owen sat back on his heels and let out a long breath. Then he carefully gathered the hatchling into his arms. It was heavier than it looked, dense-boned, solid, warm despite everything. Its frills rested against his forearm and glowed faintly, amber and slow, like something keeping itself lit through habit alone. He picked up his scanner and his bag and started walking back toward the landing zone. Sam was waiting by the ship with his arms crossed and an expression that had several things to say. Owen walked past him and up the ramp. "We're not a rescue operation," Sam called after him. "I know," Owen said. "It's probably the only one left of its kind on this entire moon." "I know that too." He found a supply room near the back of the ship, set the hatchling down on a folded blanket, and sat on the floor beside it. The frills glowed. The breathing steadied. Outside, through the hull, he could hear the engines warming up. Owen looked at the small creature sleeping in front of him and thought about the eastern wall and the scanner reading and the way Sam had told him twice that it was probably nothing. Probably nothing. He reached out and very gently adjusted the blanket so it was not touching the injured legs. "You're going to be all right," he said quietly. The hatchling's frills glowed amber in the dim light of the supply room. Owen stayed where he was and did not move for a long time. The supply room on the HSV Meridian was not designed for anything living. It had metal walls and a low ceiling and shelves along both sides stacked with equipment cases, spare parts and sealed ration boxes. The lighting was functional and cold. It smelled like recycled air and machine oil. It was, by any reasonable measure, the least comfortable place on the ship. Owen spent 3 days making it better. He pulled the lower shelves out and stacked them in the corridor. He found 2 thermal blankets in the emergency kit and layered them on the floor in the far corner. He adjusted the room's temperature control manually, warmer than standard, closer to what the Vrethkai colony climate had registered before the attack. He dimmed the lights and angled the one lamp he kept on away from the corner so it was not shining directly into golden eyes. He did not know if any of this was right. He had no data on what a Vrethkai hatchling needed to feel safe. He was working from instinct and basic biology and the simple idea that warmth and quiet were probably not wrong for any young creature that had just survived something terrible. Cinder watched him do all of it. The hatchling had woken up on the 2nd day, slowly, cautiously, in the careful way of something that had learned not to trust its surroundings too quickly. Its golden eyes had opened and moved around the room, taking everything in without expression. When they landed on Owen, they stayed there. Owen had stopped what he was doing and sat down on the floor. He held out a piece of protein ration, the plain kind, no seasoning, the closest thing he had to something that might resemble raw meat without actually being it. He held it out in his open palm and waited. Cinder looked at it for a long time. Then it looked at Owen. Then it looked at the food again. It did not take it that day. It took it on the morning of the 3rd day, and Owen counted that as a significant achievement. The scanning had to wait until Cinder was calm enough to tolerate the equipment. Owen had tried once on the 1st day and Cinder had reacted to the scanner's hum with a full frill flare and a warning sound that bounced off the metal walls loudly enough to bring Sam to the doorway. Owen had put the scanner away and not tried again until the hatchling was eating from his hand without hesitation. When he finally got the full scan, he sat with the results for a long time. The damage to both hind legs was severe. Not simply broken, the bones had been compressed and fractured in multiple places, and the nerve pathways running from the lower spine down through both limbs had been disrupted at several points. Owen understood what he was looking at well enough to know that it was serious, and he understood it well enough to know that it was beyond anything he could assess with full confidence because Vrethkai biology was almost entirely undocumented. That was the part that kept him up. He could work with broken bones in a dozen species. He had surgical tools, bone-setting compounds, regenerative treatments that had been adapted across many different biologies. But every one of those treatments had been developed with data, years of study, trial and error, documented outcomes. With Cinder he had almost nothing. The Vrethkai had been a private species that did not share their biology with outsiders, and the Galactic Medical Database had less information on them than it did on species that had only been discovered in the last decade. He searched for 6 hours straight and found 3 papers. 2 were observational, written by researchers who had seen Vrethkai from a distance and noted basic physical characteristics. The third was a partial medical study from almost 80 years ago, stopped before completion when the Vrethkai had formally refused further access. It was not enough. Owen read all 3 papers twice, wrote down everything useful, and then sat back and thought about what he actually had: a hatchling with severe leg damage, almost no reference biology, no specialist equipment, and no one on the ship who knew more about Vrethkai medicine than he did, which was very close to nothing. He looked at Cinder sleeping in the corner, frills glowing their quiet amber, and thought about the look the hatchling had given its own unresponsive legs in the ruins. He went back to the medical database and started searching differently. Not for Vrethkai specifically, but for dense-boned reptilian species with forelimb structures. 4 nerve damage in creatures with similar spinal configurations. 4 bone composition studies on species with known similarities to what the 3 papers had described. It was slower work. It was uncertain work. But it was something. He was 4 hours into this second search when the transmission request came through. The identifier was Vrethkai. Owen did not know how that was possible. There were no Vrethkai ships in this sector, no Vrethkai stations, no registered Vrethkai presence anywhere in the current navigation charts. He accepted the transmission anyway. The face that appeared on screen was unlike anything Owen had seen in the briefing images. She was old. Deeply, unmistakably old, in the way that certain things are old where age has become their most visible quality. Her scales were dark gray, faded at the edges to something almost silver. Her frills were broad and fully grown but still, not moving, held flat in a way that Owen would later learn meant careful control rather than calm. Her eyes were gold like Cinder's but darker, layered with something that had no name in any language Owen spoke. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then she said, in perfect galactic standard spoken with an accent that shaped every word like it had been considered carefully before being allowed out, "You have one of my kind aboard your vessel." "Yes," Owen said. "I found him in the colony ruins. He was alive. His hind legs are injured." "I know what happened to the colony," she said. Her voice did not change when she said it. That flatness was worse than grief would have been. "I'm treating him," Owen said. "I'm doing everything I can." "You are a human medic," she said. Not as an insult. As a statement of fact that contained within it a long list of concerns. "Yes. You have no knowledge of Vrethkai biology." "Almost none," Owen said. He did not see the point in being less than honest. "I'm researching. I'm being careful." She studied him through the screen. He did not look away. "His name," she said slowly, "is not yours to give. But I am told you have been calling him something." Owen paused. "Cinder," he said. Because of the way his frills glow. "I didn't mean any disrespect." Something moved in her expression that was gone before Owen could read it. "I am Mira," she said. "I am the last elder of the Vrethkai." Owen waited. Mira looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that changed the entire weight of the room in a single sentence. "The hatchling you are carrying," she said, "is the last fertile male of our species." Owen heard the words clearly. He understood them individually and together. His mind processed what they meant, not just for Cinder, not just for Mira, but for every Vrethkai that had ever existed and every Vrethkai that might have come after. He did not say anything for a moment. "If he does not recover," Mira continued, her voice carrying the flatness of someone saying a thing they have already had to accept, "the Vrethkai end with those who died in the colony. There will be no others. There is no other breeding pair. There is nothing else." The transmission room was very quiet. Owen turned his head slightly and looked through the open door of the supply room. From where he sat he could see the corner where Cinder was sleeping. The amber glow of his frills. The slow rise and fall of his small chest. The hind legs resting still and unmoving under the thermal blanket. One small creature in a converted supply room on a mid-class peacekeeping frigate. The last chance an entire ancient species had at continuing to exist. Owen turned back to the screen. Mira was watching him. Her expression had not changed. She was waiting to see what a human medic with almost no relevant knowledge and limited equipment was going to say to that. Owen looked at her steadily. "Then I won't fail him," he said. The words were quiet. They were not dramatic. They were the kind of words that come out when a person has already made a decision before they have fully thought it through, because something in them decided before their mind caught up. Mira studied him for a long moment. She did not say she believed him. She did not say she trusted him. But she did not end the transmission either. She stayed on the screen, and after a moment she said, "Tell me exactly what your scans have shown." And Owen pulled his chair closer and began. Mira did not trust Owen. She made this clear not by saying it directly, she was too controlled for that, but in the way she spoke to him during their transmissions. Every piece of information she shared came with a pause before it, as if she was deciding in that pause how much to give and how much to keep back. Every question he asked was met with another question first. Every time he explained his plan or his thinking, she listened without expression and then pointed out 3 things he had not considered. Owen did not take it personally. He understood it. She was the last elder of a species that had just been destroyed. The only surviving hatchling of her kind was in the hands of a human she had never met, on a ship she had never seen, being treated with methods her people had never allowed outsiders to use. Her distrust was not irrational. It was the most reasonable response she could possibly have to the situation. So he did not push back against it. He did not try to convince her that he was trustworthy. He simply showed up to every transmission prepared, asked his questions carefully, listened to every answer completely and wrote everything down. Mira noticed. She did not say so, but she noticed. The transmissions began to last longer. In the first days she had spoken to him in short exchanges, 5 minutes, sometimes 10. She answered what she chose to answer and ended the call when she decided it was over. By the end of the first week the transmissions were running close to an hour. Not because she had decided to trust him. Because there was too much he needed to know and not enough time to be careful about how much she gave. She told him about Vrethkai bone structure, how it developed from hatching, what minerals it absorbed from their native environment, why it became so dense over time. She told him about the nerve system, which ran differently from most reptilian species, branching in patterns that looked wrong by standard anatomy but had their own logic once you understood the Vrethkai body as a whole. She told him about the healing traditions her people had used for generations, the compounds they made from specific minerals, the thermal treatments, the movement methods that encouraged nerve and bone to rebuild along the correct pathways. Owen listened to all of it without interrupting. He took notes in the margins of his medical files, on the backs of equipment labels, on a folded piece of paper he kept in his jacket pocket because he never knew when she would say something important. His handwriting got smaller as the pages filled up. He cross-referenced everything she told him against the limited research he had found and against his own surgical training, building a picture piece by piece of a biology that had never been properly documented anywhere. And then, carefully, he began to put together a plan. He presented it to Mira on the 8th day. He had prepared for the transmission the way he used to prepare for difficult conversations with senior officers, thinking through every question she might ask, every weakness in the plan she might identify, every point where his knowledge was uncertain and hers was not. He laid out the approach clearly and without rushing. Human microsurgical techniques to reconnect the disrupted nerve pathways. Vrethkai mineral compounds to support the bone during and after. A combination of her people's thermal treatment methods alongside his own post-surgical care. Neither method alone would be enough. He explained why. He showed his reasoning. Mira listened to all of it without moving. Then she said, "You are proposing to use our healing traditions as though they are simply ingredients to add to your own methods." "No," Owen said. "I'm proposing to use them because they're correct for Vrethkai biology and mine are not enough without them. Your methods are the foundation. Mine are filling in what the foundation can't reach on its own." Silence. "If you damage his nerves further during the surgical stage," Mira said, "the mineral compounds will not be able to compensate." "I know," Owen said. "That's why the surgical stage has to be slow." "How slow?" "As long as it takes," he said. "I'm not putting a time limit on it." Another silence. Longer this time. "The Drellstone compound," she said finally. You will not be able to source it. It comes from a specific mineral formation native to Vrethkai territory. I found traces of it in the colony debris, Owen said. We collected samples before leaving. I've been processing them into a suspension compound using your preparation method. I'd like you to check my work before I use any of it. Mira looked at him through the screen for a long moment. She did not say she was impressed. She asked him to show her the compound and spent 20 minutes examining his preparation process and correcting 2 small errors. Owen corrected them without comment and showed her the adjusted result. She told him it was acceptable. That was the closest thing to approval she had given him yet. The morning of the surgery, Owen was up before the ship's lighting shifted to its daytime cycle. He had slept 4 hours, not because he could not sleep longer but because there was nothing left to prepare, and lying still with his thoughts had become less useful than getting up. He went through his equipment one more time. Every tool cleaned, calibrated, laid out in the order he would need them. The Drellstone compound in its thermal container, kept at the temperature Mira had specified. The sedative dose calculated and recalculated until he was certain. Cinder was awake when Owen came in. The hatchling was sitting up in his corner, watching the door, frills glowing their usual amber. He had grown in the weeks aboard the ship, not dramatically but visibly. His scales had deepened slightly in color. His eyes tracked movement faster than they had in the beginning. He watched Owen set up the equipment without alarm. He had become used to Owen moving around him, adjusting things, scanning, checking. He no longer flinched at the scanner's hum. He no longer pulled back when Owen reached toward him. Owen sat down in front of him and looked at him directly. "This is going to take a while," he said quietly. "And you won't be awake for it. But I'll be here the whole time. You understand?" Cinder looked at him with those deep gold eyes. Owen administered the sedative slowly and carefully, watching Cinder's frills dim as the medication took hold. The hatchling's eyes stayed on Owen until they closed. Even then, even under sedation, the frills kept their faint glow, not amber anymore but a very pale gold, barely there, the way a flame looks in bright daylight. Owen gave himself 1 minute. He sat still and looked at the sleeping hatchling and thought about nothing except the first step of the procedure. Just the first step. One thing at a time. Then he began. The surgery was slow in a way that required a particular kind of patience. Not the patience of waiting, but the patience of moving through something demanding when every instinct says to hurry. The Vrethkai nerve pathways did not follow the patterns Owen's training was built on. They branched where standard anatomy would not branch. They connected in sequences that looked wrong until he held Mira's descriptions in his mind alongside what he was seeing and the 2 pictures aligned. He worked with the smallest tools he had. He checked Mira's notes between each stage. At the 4-hour mark he paused for 10 minutes, stretched his hands, drank water, and checked Cinder's vitals before continuing. At the 6-hour mark he found the worst of the nerve damage, a section along the lower spinal branch where the disruption was more extensive than the scans had suggested. He stopped. He thought about it carefully. He adjusted his approach, took longer on that section than on any other, and moved through it step by careful step. The Drellstone compound went in during the final 2 hours, applied in slow layers to the bone along the exact pattern Mira had described, worked into the fracture sites, sealed with the thermal treatment she had specified. Owen followed her instructions precisely, without improvising, without shortcuts. When it was finished he set his tools down and stood up straight for the first time in 9 hours. Cinder was breathing steadily. Frills still glowing that pale gold. Vitals holding. Owen checked everything twice. Then he walked out of the supply room, sat down on the floor in the corridor with his back against the wall, and closed his eyes. The hardest part of what came next was that there was nothing left for him to do. The surgery was finished. The compounds were in. The body would do what it would do, and no amount of preparation or precision or careful planning had any power over what happened now. He sat on the floor outside the door and stared at nothing. Down the corridor the ship moved through space quietly. Inside the supply room Cinder slept. And Owen waited. The first week after the surgery was the hardest kind of waiting. Not the waiting that had something to watch or listen to or work through. The empty kind. The kind where the only thing left to do was check vitals, change the compound dressings, keep the room warm, and try not to look at Cinder's hind legs too often because looking at them too often led to thinking too much about what it would mean if nothing changed. Owen checked the vitals every 4 hours. He changed the dressings exactly as Mira had instructed. He kept the room 2 degrees warmer than the rest of the ship, and he dimmed the lights in the evening, and he brought Cinder fresh food and water and sat with him every morning before his shift and every night before he slept. Cinder was awake and alert within 2 days of the surgery. His eyes were clear. His appetite came back faster than Owen expected. His frills had returned to their amber glow, and sometimes, when Owen sat close and spoke to him quietly, they brightened slightly, not much but enough to notice. But his hind legs did not move. They lay still and flat against the thermal blanket, exactly as they had since Owen had lifted him out of the ruins. Cinder looked at them sometimes. Not often. He seemed to have made some kind of internal decision not to spend too much time looking at things he could not change. But occasionally, in quiet moments, his golden eyes would drop to his own hind legs and rest there for a few seconds before moving away again. Owen reported to Mira every 2 days. Their transmissions had changed in quality since the surgery. Mira was still careful. She was still not warm in any way that would normally be called warmth. But the pauses before her answers were shorter now, and she had stopped asking questions designed to test whether Owen had made mistakes. She asked practical questions instead, about the dressing condition, about Cinder's temperature, about his eating patterns and his behavior and his frills. She asked about the frills more than anything else. Owen learned that Vrethkai frills communicated things their faces did not. Color, brightness, movement, all of it meant something. Amber meant a resting state, neither distressed nor content. A brighter gold meant something positive, comfort, interest, something close to happiness in the way a young creature experiences happiness. Pale and dim meant pain or fear. Flat and still meant the deepest kind of distress. Owen started paying different attention to the frills after that. He brightens when you enter the room, Mira told him during one transmission, in the same tone she used for all factual information. That's good, Owen said. It means he has formed a trust bond, she said. In Vrethkai Young this is not a small thing. It is not easily given. Owen looked at his notes and did not say anything for a moment. Does that change how I should handle him? He asked. No, Mira said. It simply means you should understand the weight of it. Owen understood the weight of it. On the 9th day after surgery, Owen was changing the dressing on Cinder's left hind leg when he felt it. A movement. Slight, so slight that for a moment he thought he had imagined it. He went completely still and watched. Nothing. He waited 30 seconds and then very gently pressed 2 fingers against the outer edge of the hind foot, just below where the leg met the ankle joint. The lightest possible pressure. Test. Cinder's foot twitched. Not a large movement. Not a dramatic one. A small involuntary reflex. The kind of movement that means the pathway between nerve and muscle is not dead, just interrupted. Just trying to find its way back. Owen sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he opened his notes and wrote down the time and the location and exactly what he had felt, with 3 underlines beneath it. He reported it to Mira that evening. She was quiet for longer than usual after he told her. Which leg? She asked. Left. Lower foot. Reflex response to light pressure. Another silence. Test the right side tomorrow, she said. The same method. Do not apply more pressure than you used today. I won't, Owen said. He tested the right side the next morning. The response was fainter, slower and less defined, but it was there. He reported it. Mira asked him 4 precise questions about the quality of each response and listened to his answers without interrupting. The left pathway is recovering faster, she said. This is consistent with the damage pattern you described. It is not a concern. It's a good sign though, Owen said. Mira paused. Yes, she said in a tone that suggested the word cost her something. It is a good sign. 2 days after that, Cinder's tail moved. Not a reflex, a deliberate movement. He was watching Owen eat lunch at the small table he had brought into the room, and his tail shifted across the blanket in one slow sweep, the way a cat moves its tail when something has caught its attention. Owen looked up and saw it and put his food down slowly so he would not startle anything. Cinder looked at his own tail. Moved it again. Deliberately. His frills went bright gold. Owen laughed, a short, quiet sound that surprised him slightly. Cinder's frills flared brighter at the sound and the hatchling made a low noise in his chest that Owen had not heard before. Warm. Curious. Yeah, Owen said. That's a good thing. The exercises began the following week. Mira had described them in detail during an earlier transmission. Specific movement patterns used in Vrethkai rehabilitation, developed over generations for exactly this kind of nerve and bone recovery. They were gentle and slow and had to be done consistently, once in the morning and once in the evening, without pushing past the point of resistance. Owen followed every instruction precisely. He moved Cinder's hind legs through the patterns carefully, watching the hatchling's frills for any sign of pain, any dimming, any flattening, and stopping immediately if he saw it. Cinder tolerated the exercises with patience that continued to surprise Owen for something so young. He would lie still and watch Owen work with an expression that seemed to have decided this was simply part of the day now. The ship's crew had become quietly invested. None of them said much about it. Peacekeepers were not generally a sentimental group, and they would not have described themselves as caring deeply about the situation. But the supply room door was never blocked by equipment left carelessly in the corridor anymore. The cook had started setting aside the plainest, most meat-adjacent protein portions without being asked. Sam had, without comment, reassigned the storage closet opposite the supply room so that the corridor outside Cinder's space stayed quiet during the hours Owen had marked as rest time. Nobody talked about any of this. It simply happened. 3 weeks after the surgery, Owen arrived at the supply room one morning to find Cinder already awake and sitting differently than usual. Not in his resting position. Upright, front legs straight, his whole body oriented forward in a way that looked like intention. Owen stopped in the doorway. Cinder looked at him. The frills were bright, brighter than the usual morning amber. Something was different in the quality of his attention. Focused. Decided. Owen came in slowly and sat down on the floor across the room. Not beside Cinder. Far enough away to give him space. He set down the food he had brought and left it there and waited to see what Cinder was going to do. Cinder looked at his hind legs. He shifted his weight forward onto his front legs and pushed, trying to bring his hind legs under his body, trying to stand. The left hind leg responded partially, coming up and shaking badly before collapsing. Cinder went down with a sound of effort and lay still for a moment. Owen did not move. Cinder tried again. The same motion, the same effort, the same result. Both hind legs gave out at the moment they needed to hold, and he went down harder this time, frills dimming briefly with frustration before coming back. Owen stayed exactly where he was. He did not reach out. He did not speak. He moved from where he was sitting to the floor closer to Cinder, not close enough to interfere, just close enough to be present, and he stayed there. Cinder rested for 30 seconds. His frills steadied. His breathing slowed. He looked at the floor in front of him and then he gathered himself and pushed again, all 4 legs working together this time, the hind legs shaking violently, every small muscle in his body working at once. The frills went gold. Bright full gold. Cinder stood. He was shaking from his jaw to the end of his tail. His hind legs trembled so hard that it looked like they might give out with every breath. But they held. He was upright, all 4 legs on the ground, head up, frills blazing, and he did not fall. Owen looked up at the ceiling. He kept his eyes there for a while, jaw tight, breathing carefully through his nose. Down the corridor, completely unannounced, Sam Greer stopped walking past the open doorway and stood very still with his coffee going cold in his hand. Nobody said anything. Cinder stood in the warm amber light of the supply room, shaking and golden and absolutely refusing to fall, and Owen looked at the ceiling for as long as he needed to. Waypoint Orin was the kind of station that never slept. It sat at the intersection of 4 major trade routes and handled more traffic in a single day than most stations saw in a month. Ships came and went at all hours. The docking bays were always loud. The corridors were always full. Diplomats and traders and peacekeepers and researchers moved through it in a constant stream, each one carrying their own urgency, their own direction, their own sense that whatever they were doing was the most important thing happening on the station at that moment. Elder Mira arrived on a small unmarked transport and walked through all of it like it was not there. Owen was waiting near the docking bay entrance with Sam standing 2 steps behind him. He had seen images of Vrethkai adults in the mission briefings. Large, 4-winged, impressive in the way that ancient things are impressive. He had spoken to Mira across a screen for weeks. He thought he had a reasonable sense of what to expect. He had underestimated her. She was enormous, taller than any species he had shared a corridor with before, and broader, with a physical presence that the space around her seemed to feel. Her scales were dark gray fading to silver at the edges, worn in the way of something very old but not fragile. The way stone is worn by water, smoother and harder for it. Her frills were fully extended and completely still, silver white and wide, held in a position of absolute control. Her eyes were the same deep layered gold as Cinder's but darker, carrying decades of things Owen did not have words for. Every person in the corridor moved out of her way without being asked. Most of them did not seem to fully understand why they had done it until she had already passed. She stopped in front of Owen. She was tall enough that Owen had to look up slightly to meet her eyes. She looked down at him and said nothing for a long moment. She studied him the way she had studied his compound preparation weeks ago, carefully, completely, without rushing to a conclusion. Owen held her gaze and waited. Behind him he heard Sam shift his weight slightly and then go still again. "You are smaller than I expected," Mira said finally. "People say that," Owen said. Something moved briefly at the corner of her expression. It was gone before it fully arrived. "Where is he?" she said. "Not a question. Medical bay. Resting. His walking has improved significantly in the last week. I didn't want to bring him into a busy corridor before I knew how he'd handle the noise and the crowd." Mira looked at him for another moment. Then she gave a single slow nod, a gesture that seemed to mean she had considered this and found it acceptable. She followed Owen without another word, and the crowd parted around them the entire way. Cinder was awake when they arrived. He was sitting near the center of the medical bay space Owen had arranged. More room than the supply room on the ship, with better light and a proper thermal mat and enough floor space that Cinder could take several steps in any direction. He was larger than he had been at the start. His scales had deepened. His wings, still folded, had grown noticeably. His walk, when he moved, was uneven but real, a slight difficulty on the right side that the exercises were still working to correct, but 4 legs on the ground and moving forward. When Mira walked through the door, Cinder went completely still. His frills did something Owen had not seen before. They did not go amber or gold or pale. They shifted through 3 colors in rapid sequence, a flash of something bright, then a deep color Owen had no name for, then a long slow fade into something warm and steady. His whole body was rigid for a moment. Then he made a sound. Owen had heard Cinder make many sounds over the weeks. The warning growl from the ruins. The curious chest sound when his tail first moved. The low warm noise he made sometimes when Owen arrived in the morning. This sound was different from all of them. It was deeper and longer and it filled the room completely, resonating off the walls and floor, and it broke twice in the middle in a way that sounded less like an animal and more like a person trying to hold something together. Mira made the same sound back. She crossed the room and lowered herself to the floor in front of Cinder, a movement that must have cost her something at her size and age, and put her head down close to his. They stayed like that for a long time. Foreheads almost touching. Frills moving slowly. Sounds passing between them too low for Owen to hear clearly. Owen stepped back. Sam was already in the doorway. They both looked somewhere else and let the moment be private. When Mira straightened again, she sat on the floor rather than standing. It made her slightly less overwhelming in scale. She looked at Owen across the room and said, "Sit down." Owen sat. "I am going to tell you something," she said, "that I have not told anyone outside my own kind. I am telling you because you have earned the right to understand what you are in the middle of." Owen waited. "The attack on the colony was not random," Mira said. "It was not a raid. It was not an accident of the border conflicts that your council reports have been calling it." Her voice stayed flat and even. Owen had learned that this was how she carried the heaviest things, without letting her voice move, because if she let it move it would go somewhere she could not afford to follow. "Beneath Vrethkai territory," she continued, "there are deposits of a mineral called soline. It exists in very few places in the known galaxy. Its value is," she paused. "Your economic systems do not have a number large enough to be meaningful. It powers certain technologies that the largest galactic industries have been trying to access for decades." Owen said nothing. He was listening completely. "A faction within the Galactic Council has known about these deposits for 11 years, Mira said. "They have also known that Vrethkai territorial law, recognized under the original Council Charter, makes those deposits inaccessible as long as our species exists and maintains claim to our lands." She looked at him steadily. "We would never sell. We would never permit extraction." They knew this. They had tried other approaches for years. The room was very quiet. "So they removed the obstacle," Owen said. "Yes," Mira said simply. Owen sat with that for a moment. He thought about the colony. The carved walls. The cloth under the beam. The child's toy made from river stone. "They planned it carefully," Mira continued. "A complete destruction. No survivors, no evidence that could be traced directly, recorded as an unidentified aggressor attack in a border region where such things are not uncommon." She paused. "They did not plan for a hatchling to survive. The section of the colony where Cinder was sheltering was in a lower chamber. The collapse protected him rather than—" She stopped. Started again. "They did not plan for him. And they didn't plan for someone to dig him out," Owen said. "No," Mira said. "They did not plan for you." She looked at him directly. "From the moment your ship left that moon with Cinder aboard, you were his protection without knowing it. A Galactic Council peacekeeping vessel carrying a medic with a patient. There was no clean way for the faction to reach him without exposing themselves. Every week you kept him, every transmission logged in official medical records, every report filed with your commanding officer, all of it created a record and a witness that made moving against him too dangerous. Owen thought about Sam telling him to leave the reading behind. About the Galactic Council's request to transfer Cinder to an official sanctuary, which would have placed him in a facility the faction had influence over. About how firmly both he and Mira had refused. "They're still trying," Owen said. It was not a question. "They will keep trying," Mira said. "Through legal channels. Through bureaucratic processes. Through pressure applied quietly to your commanding officers and mine. They are patient and they have significant resources." She paused. "But I have been collecting evidence for 30 years. I knew this was coming before they had finished planning it. I could not stop the attack. I was not in a position to act without exposing what I knew too early." Her frills moved, a slow controlled ripple. "That is something I will carry for the rest of my life." Cinder had moved during this conversation. He had walked, carefully with his slight uneven gait, across the room and settled beside Owen, pressing his side against Owen's leg and staying there. Owen had not moved away. Mira watched this without expression. Then she straightened fully and began to speak. The language was not galactic standard. It was something older, a sound that seemed to have more weight than its volume, words shaped differently from anything Owen had heard, each one landing with a deliberate completeness. She spoke for almost 2 minutes. Her frills were fully extended and completely still throughout. Her eyes were on Owen. When she finished she was quiet for a moment. "I have just spoken a declaration under the oldest tradition of my people," she said. "Witnessed in this room and recorded." She glanced briefly upward at the station's monitoring systems. "By this station's systems, which makes it a matter of permanent official record." "What did you declare?" Owen said carefully. "I have named you Cinder's sworn guardian," she said. "In Vrethkai tradition this bond has existed since before we had written language. It cannot be transferred. It cannot be legally overturned. It supersedes any council committee decision, any sanctuary transfer order, any bureaucratic process the faction or anyone else attempts to use." She held his gaze. "He is in your protection. Formally. Permanently. Under the charter that created the Galactic Council in the first place. A charter which recognized Vrethkai tradition as legally binding." Owen looked at Cinder pressed warm against his leg. Cinder's frills were glowing, full gold, steady and bright. "I didn't do this for a legal bond," Owen said quietly. "I know," Mira said. "That is exactly why I gave you one." The sanctuary world did not have a name yet. Mira had been asked about this several times by council representatives and station administrators and at least 2 researchers who had arrived with clipboards and very organized questions. She gave each of them the same answer in the same tone. The world would be named when it had been lived in long enough to earn one. Names given too early were just sounds. Names earned over time meant something. Nobody argued with her twice. Owen had been on the planet for 3 months now. His unit had officially reassigned him. A process that had involved a significant amount of paperwork, 2 formal objections from senior officers, and 1 very long conversation with a council liaison that Sam had later described as the most uncomfortable meeting he had ever witnessed from the doorway. In the end the sworn guardian declaration held the weight Mira had said it would hold, and the paperwork resolved itself in Owen's favor, and that was that. He had a small structure near the eastern ridge, not quite a house, more like a long room with good walls and a wide doorway that had been built to accommodate Cinder's growing size. The planet's builders, a small crew of volunteers Mira had arranged, had not asked many questions. They had looked at Cinder once, taken some measurements of the doorway, and made it wider without being asked. Life on the sanctuary world was quieter than anything Owen had known in 6 years of service. He had not expected to adjust to the quiet as easily as he did. In the mornings he walked the ridge path while the planet's sun was still low and the light was long and pale across the grass plains below. The grass was not the same green as anything on Earth. It had a slightly silver quality at certain angles, like it could not quite decide between green and gray, and in the early morning light it moved in waves that looked almost like water. Owen had spent a considerable amount of his first 2 weeks simply watching it. Cinder usually found him somewhere along the ridge path. The hatchling, though hatchling was becoming a less accurate word with every passing week, had taken to the planet in a way that was straightforward and complete, the way young creatures take to spaces they recognize as theirs. He explored constantly. He disappeared for hours into the rock formations on the northern side of the ridge and returned with his scales dusty and his frills bright and his energy entirely undiminished. He had discovered that the thermal vents along the lower cliff face were warm in a specific way he seemed to find satisfying, and he spent long afternoon hours stretched out near them with his wings half open. His walk was nearly perfect now. The right side still had a very slight hesitation. something Owen noticed because he had watched every stage of its recovery and knew exactly what to look for. No one else would have seen it. Mira had told him 2 weeks ago that even she could no longer detect it in normal movement. Owen had kept this information to himself and continued the morning exercises anyway, not because they were strictly necessary anymore but because Cinder had decided they were part of the morning and arrived for them with consistent expectation. The evidence against the Council faction had become public 4 weeks after their arrival on the Sanctuary world. Petra Wells had turned out to be exactly what Owen had hoped for when he sent her the quiet, carefully worded message from Waypoint Orin. She was a journalist of the thorough and patient kind, the kind that understood the difference between having a story and being able to prove a story, and did not publish until she could do both. She had taken Mira's decades of collected evidence and spent 6 weeks cross-referencing and verifying and finding the connecting threads that turned documentation into proof. The story ran across every major galactic news network simultaneously on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, 3 senior council members had resigned. By the following week, formal investigations had been opened. The Soline deposits beneath the Vrethkai territorial lands were placed under protected status pending the outcome, a legal designation that carried more protection than anything the faction could have anticipated, because the story had made the deposits famous, and famous things are difficult to steal quietly. Mira had watched the news coverage from the Sanctuary world without visible satisfaction. When Owen asked her how she felt about it, she was quiet for a moment. "I feel that it is the beginning of something longer," she said. "Not an ending." Owen understood what she meant. The faction was dismantled but not gone. Its members would face consequences of varying degrees. Some would face significant ones. Others would find ways to minimize what happened to them. The Vrethkai territory was protected now in ways it had not been before, and Cinder's status was secure, but the world was still the world and patient problems did not disappear because they had been exposed. "It's enough for today," Owen said. Mira looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It is enough for today." On a morning in the 3rd month, Owen was sitting at the top of the eastern cliff eating breakfast when he heard something that made him put his food down. He had heard Cinder run before, short bursts across the compound area, careful movements that had lengthened and strengthened over time. But this was different. This was the sound of something running the way it was always supposed to run, without hesitation or calculation or the careful management of a body that was still remembering how to work. He stood up and looked out over the wide grass plain that spread below the cliff face. Cinder was at the far edge of it. He had come down from the northern rocks sometime in the early morning and found the plain while Owen was still asleep, and what he had done with it was what any young creature does when it finds open space and good ground and a body that finally works the way it was made to. He ran. He was fast. Owen had not known how fast because there had never been enough space to find out. He moved across the silver-green grass with a long ground-covering stride that was nothing like the careful measured steps of the medical bay or the supply room or the compound path. His wings were half spread for balance, catching the air without lifting, not flying not yet but using everything he had. His frills were fully extended and blazing gold in the low morning light. His tail swept behind him in long arcs. He ran the full length of the plain and reached the far tree line and turned and ran back. Owen watched from the cliff top and did not move. On the second pass Cinder was faster. On the third he was faster still, like he was discovering each time what his body could actually do when he stopped being careful about it. He ran until he seemed to run out of the need to run, and then he slowed, and then he stopped near the base of the cliff and stood in the grass with his sides moving and his frills still bright and his head up. He looked up at the cliff. He found Owen without difficulty, the way he always found Owen, and he looked at him from across the distance of the plain and the height of the cliff, and his frills went a color Owen had only seen a few times. Deeper than gold, richer, the color of something the sun does right before it sets when the conditions are exactly right. It took Cinder 20 minutes to climb the cliff path to where Owen was sitting. He arrived without hurrying, stepping carefully and deliberately over the rocky sections, and settled beside Owen at the cliff edge with the ease of something that had decided this was simply where it belonged. The sun was lower now. The plain below had gone from silver-green to something warmer. The wind had dropped and the grass was still and the sky had started its long slow change toward evening. They sat together without moving for a long time. Then Cinder made a sound. Owen had been collecting Cinder's sounds for months. He knew the warning sound and the curious sound and the content sound and the sound he made during exercises when something pulled uncomfortably. He did not know this one. It was deeper than any of them, low and resonant and slow, like something being said rather than felt. It came from deep in Cinder's chest and it did not stop quickly. It held and moved and held again. Behind them both, quiet footsteps on the cliff path. Mira had been on the sanctuary world for a week, managing the legal documentation that followed the news coverage. Owen had heard her arrive but had not seen her since morning. He did not turn around now. He listened to the sound of her settling on the rocks behind them and waited. Cinder made the sound again. Mira was quiet for a long moment. "Vreth Solon," she said finally. Softly, in a way Owen had not heard her speak before. Owen waited. "There is no clean translation," she said. "Your language does not carry it exactly." Pause. "The closest meaning would be, you are the reason I did not give up." The plain below was golden now in the last of the light. Owen looked out at it and said nothing for a long time. He had not set out to save a species. He had not known he was doing anything beyond the only thing he was capable of doing when he found a living creature in the dark and the rubble, staying and working and refusing to leave. He was a medic. It was not a complicated thought process. It was not a heroic one. It was simply what the job meant to him at the level where the job and the person were the same thing. He had not known about Soline or council factions or ancient territorial charters. He had not known about sworn guardian traditions or the weight of Vrethkai naming ceremonies. He had known about a scanner reading and a collapsed wall and a small creature with golden eyes that had given its last warning growl at him from under the rubble and then let him help anyway. Cinder pressed warm against his side. The frills glowed deep gold in the fading light, steady and full, the color of something that had come through the worst thing and was still here on the other side of it. Owen put his hand against Cinder's side, the way he had done 100 times in the supply room in the medical bay and the compound path, and felt the slow strong rhythm underneath. He had not saved the last of his kind. He had simply refused to walk away from one small life in the rubble. And that one small life had grown into something that now sat beside him on a cliff edge on an unnamed world, glowing gold in the last of the light, carrying in his chest a word that meant, in a language older than most of the stars they could see from where they sat, that he had not given up. Because someone had not given up on him first.